This is 5 Live Formula One with Jenny Gow.
Hello and welcome to a very soggy Silverstone for coverage of the British Grand Prix. It's qualifying day. It's also Euros Day, but it's qualifying day here at Silverstone. Ahead of that, we have free practice 3, and Lando Norris is in the form of his life. Fastest yesterday in the McLaren, and hoping to do the same thing again to try and claw back that 81-point gap to Max Verstappen, who is leading this championship at the moment. But last time out, it was high drama as Verstappen and Norris clashed in Austria. And the fallout, well, apparently they're back to being friends, but we shall see. I'm eyeing up Max Verstappen. He's currently just got into his car. He's looking out at the crowds who... There's a smattering, I think, in the central grandstand in front of me. In the commentary box, nice and warm, is Mark Priestley, who will lead us through comms today. Mark, how warm is it there? Is it nice and dry as well?
Well, I hate to rub it in, but it is quite lovely up here. We've got a wonderful view, sat just above the pit lane and overlooking the start-finish straight, so we can see all of those fans that are in the grandstand. The weather and the rain certainly won't put them off today, will they? They are die-hard, hardcore fans that we always get here at Silverstone, and I think they're in for a treat today.
The fans have been amazing this weekend, and I've spoken to so many of them this morning who have gone through the night with very little sleep. Marshals too, they're all here volunteering to make sure that we can actually go racing, and I've spoken to lots of them. And the thunderstorm and rain hit at about 2 o'clock. There were some of them have very large flagpoles attached to their tents, and those acted as lightning conductors. So there's been a lot of fun. A lot of people are very sleepy down here, and it's the third of a triple header. So yeah, you'll find some tired eyes, but Andrew Benson is never tired of Formula One. He's our F1 correspondent. What's going to happen today, Andrew?
Well, I might not be tired of Formula One, Jenny, but I haven't got a crystal ball, as David Coulthard used to say. Actually, I'm slightly paraphrasing him. He was a bit ruder than that. Yeah, look, you get weekends like this at Silverstone every now and again, don't you, Jenny? I remember one in 1988, sitting in the grandstand at Copse, getting my trousers extremely wet from the rain coming in from the side, and 2000, if people remember the mud bath that was there in April. It's one of those weekends. It's 11 degrees this morning. It feels like winter, I have to say. But Silverstone always puts on a good show, even if it's not always the easiest to get in and out of. And so I'm expecting another Norris versus Verstappen battle, actually. Wet or dry. They're both terrific in the wet. So let's hope, Jenny, that we get some track action this morning, because the issue is with weather like this predicted for most of the rest of the weekend, the teams are going to be guarding those intermediate and wet tyres, and because there's a limited allocation, they may not be that keen to go out at the beginning on what is still a damp track.
Well, Max Verstappen is in his car. If I walk along, Sergio Perez not in his car. Next to them, it's the Mercedes garage, and George Russell in his car, so that's always good. Let's see if Lewis Hamilton is also in his car. And it's a long slog down from this garage at Mercedes down to Ferrari, because they've put the F1 garage in between. This is the new film that's coming out next year, Brad Pitt starring. Produced by Lewis Hamilton, he's helping them, yeah, they've got a massive garage here all set up for the film. They're filming on set as well. They'll be using Silverstone as the backdrop, and it's quite exciting for F1, isn't it, Mark?
Really big deal, yeah. This is what we all hope will be probably the first movie of any motorsport that we hope to be really authentic, that we hope is going to really show what Formula One is actually like. We've got a huge amount of new fans that have come into this sport over the last couple of years, a lot of them having stumbled across it through the Drive to Survive Netflix show, and now that they're here, they need a little bit of explanation, a bit more of a background, a bit of understanding of what it's like. And I think the Hollywood approach to this, although it's going to be big and glitzy and glamorous, with the aid of Lewis Hamilton, part of the reason he's been brought on board is to make it as realistic as possible. So I hope we get that. We're going to see it around the summer of next year, 2025. But it looks like it'll be big, and I can't wait.
At the moment, I've just made my way down to Ferrari. There are lots of woolly hats in the pit lane, and a lot of people thinking it looks like December. It's so cold down here. But Charles Leclerc is in his car. at the moment, as is Carlos Sainz. And I believe we followed Carlos Sainz into the track today. It was very wet. It was a long queue, and everyone who walked past the car recognised him, gave him a wave. But nice hire car to have for the weekend. Hey, Andrew?
Yeah, it was a Ferrari, unsurprisingly, that Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc was driving. We were never quite sure, were we, Jenny, whether it was Sainz or Leclerc. I agree with you. I think it probably was Sainz. He was very careful going under the Copse tunnel, wasn't he, not to ground that splitter at the front. But he's got a car of a completely different dimension to drive now, even compared to a road-going Ferrari. They didn't look in too bad shape, Ferrari, yesterday. And the first car is leaving the pits, Jenny.
Oh, OK, that's good news. It will be the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, who was in a chipper mood this morning, just drying off his shoes before he got on. So the pit lane is now officially open as the other Haas goes out. Lando Norris is being strapped into his McLaren. Let's see what FP3 will bring us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenny. You're absolutely right. We've got a green light at the end of the pit lane, and we have got cars now coming out onto the circuits. This is, of course, round 12 of what is Formula One's longest ever season in history. 24 races on the calendar this year, and this one marks the halfway point at one of Formula One's most historic and iconic circuits. It was, of course, back in 1950, the 13th of May, where the very first Formula One World Championship event was held at this very circuit. And 1,112 rounds later, here we are back again. Andrew, you must have been at most of those, I imagine, have you?
The British Grand Prix, I've been at a fair few in my time. My first one here, actually, Mark, was in 1983, and it was baking hot that weekend. And then 2 years later, I came back to Silverstone because the race used to alternate between Brands Hatch and Silverstone in those days, as you were telling us your own experiences of Brands Hatch as sneaking in under the fence when you were a youngster.
Don't tell everybody.
And
it was a long time ago.
Yeah, but then 2 years later at Silverstone, it was a weekend very like this, freezing cold, and that was the first 160-mile-an-hour average lap, I remember, with Keke Rosberg putting the Williams on pole. Lots of memories since then, and the weather never fails to play some kind of trick on you here.
The great British summer, absolutely. So everybody out at the moment. We've got about 6 or 7 cars now out on the circuit, all on that intermediate tyre, the green banded tyre, just doing sort of sighter laps, installation laps, and getting a feel for things down there. How is it in the pit lane, Jenny? Jenny, are you with us down in the pit lane? No, Jenny's not with us at the moment. She's running around trying to stay out of the rain because it is starting to drizzle, and the circuit is wet again. We're getting a lot of spray coming off the cars. As I see Magnussen come past us, big rooster tail of spray flying up behind those cars, but it won't take very long to dry out. Jenny, I gather you're with us now.
Yes, I am, sorry. So Oscar Piastri's just gone out from the McLaren garage. I'm stood next to a mechanic who's shivering in the cold, but they are due to send Lando out in a minute. They haven't done that yet. Tyre warmers are still on. Cars still raise the foot in the air. Let's see what Lando Norris can do when he eventually gets out on track.
Yes, there's going to be a lot of eyes on Lando and McLaren at the moment with their resurgence in form and really bringing the fight back to the front, bringing the fight to Red Bull that haven't had too much in the way of competition in reality over the last couple of years, but that has all changed. And despite that big lead that Max Verstappen has, Lando Norris is certainly not giving up on the fact that he can take that battle right to Max Verstappen. We saw it, in fact, go so close last time out in Austria. They went wheel to wheel and ended up giving each other punches, and we all know the fallout from that has been rumbling on. They have remained friends, so they say, but that battle will be no less tense this time out.
Yeah, it seems that the drivers are more friendly than the team bosses. Zach Brown, McLaren CEO, was in the press conference yesterday making some remarks about Red Bull, saying that they lacked respect. I'll read a couple of them out to you, Mark.
Didn't pull any punches, did he?
He did not. We need to have respect for regulations, and we've seen there be lack of respect, whether it's financial regulations or sporting, on-track issues with fathers and things of that nature. I just don't think that's how we need to go racing. We need to guide drivers on what's right or wrong. So he's managed to bring together there every single issue that's affecting Red Bull this year and in the last 2 years, actually. The cost cap breach in 2021, the allegations it made against Christian Horner by a female employee that he denies, the internal battle at Red Bull, and as Brown sees it, their inability to tell Max Verstappen what's right and wrong when it comes to racing on the track. By the way, the cars are out now. We're watching Verstappen go around Copse, and he's just had a massive twitch. It still looks very, very wet out there, Mark, doesn't it?
It really is. We've got all 20 cars out on the circuit, every single one of them on the intermediate tyre, and you're right, Max Verstappen tiptoeing his way around, and he's actually had a complete spin, a complete 360-degree spin, quite slow speed, and unbelievably managed to keep it pointing in exactly the same direction that he started that movement in. It was almost perfectly done, that. It was almost choreographed. He continues, but it is all about finding where the grip is. These are the first exploratory laps in these kind of conditions, and who knows, with weather being so unpredictable as the weekend goes on, it could be really valuable learning information that's gathered here. We don't expect the rain to get too much heavier over the course of this session, but it is very unpredictable, and temperatures being very low, meaning it's really hard to generate tyre temperature and therefore grip, as all of those drivers are now currently finding out. As things stand with just 5 minutes gone, and bearing in mind that everybody is tiptoeing around on the intermediate tyres, it is actually Fernando Alonso, the Rainmeister himself in the Aston Martin, who tops the timesheets at the moment, followed by Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Bottas, Magnussen and Logan Sargent, but expect that to change dramatically as the session rolls on. A lot of the running yesterday, Andrew, it was all done in the dry, rather, apart from the last couple of laps of FP2. And it was Lando Norris that topped both of the two sessions in terms of the timesheets. Oscar Piastri up there as well. So McLaren looking in pretty good shape, particularly in the dry this weekend so far. We didn't see everything from Max Verstappen yet, but certainly out the box, McLaren looking good. Yeah, it was a funny session to read yesterday, Mark, wasn't it? Verstappen actually went off at Beckett's on his quickest lap on the soft tyres, which is why he was only 7th in the timesheets. When you looked at the race simulation runs later in the session before the rain came, actually Verstappen was marginally the quicker, but it was the same story as it has been for the last 4 or 5 races. Verstappen and Norris were the two quickest guys, and then the others lining up pretty much in order behind them. Norris actually said he thought the Mercedes were as quick as McLaren yesterday. It didn't look like that from the long runs, actually, but they're sort of in the game. And here's Ricciardo's radio.
The track is wetter than expected, but it's going to improve quickly. All the cars on track.
Yeah, so that's Ricciardo's engineer just explaining that the fact that we've got all 20 cars on track with the intermediate tyres, they do disperse a huge amount of water. It's all being thrown up in the air, of course. It disperses from the track, and what he's saying is that very quickly, without rain falling at the moment, we will expect to get a dry line as we've got a car in the gravel. It's one of the Alpines off. A red flag because we've got a car beach. It's Gasly.
Yeah, he's gone off at Vale there, hasn't he? The sort of last chicane before the sweeping right-hander of Club back onto the pit straight. He's beached it sideways. He's had a spin, it looks like, because the car's pointing in the wrong direction. So he's done a proper job of it, but we've seen Verstappen have a 360. We've seen Charles Leclerc go off at Copse. The times are coming down quickly. Alonso was quickest, as Mark said. He was then beaten by Leclerc, and Tsunoda has then beaten that time by 1.3 seconds. And we just had an indication on the screen that it's going to rain more in 4 minutes' time. And we're joined in the box a little bit late, but in true racing driver style, by Sam Bird, the McLaren Formula E driver.
Hello, everybody.
How are you doing, Sam? What have you been up to? Why are you late? What's your excuse?
I had something hold me up, but anyway.
You're a bit breathless, Sam, as well.
I'm here now. That's the main thing.
Well, you are here, and you've also got very recent experience of being on this circuit. Not in one of these cars, but you've been out doing the hot laps this morning. So how slippery is it?
Extremely slippery. This circuit has always been tricky in the wet. It seems to hold the water for quite a long time, and it is so cold out there that moisture is just sitting on the surface, not going anywhere. Also, it can get quite greasy, and it makes it so difficult for these drivers.
Yeah, we've already seen a few tiptoe their way around. Max Verstappen had a spin. Gasly is in the gravel, which has brought out the red flag. So let's go down to Jenny in the pit lane.
Yeah, just at Mercedes garage. They've just brought both of their drivers in, obviously with the red flag. done a quick tyre change. George Russell came in and actually missed his marks quite dramatically. It's really wet down here. The apron for the pit lane is cement, and the tarmac is the fast lane. So when they come in, they angle the boxes slightly inwards. Well, each team does it slightly differently, but Mercedes angle their pit box slightly inwards. And he must have missed the marks by about 10 centimetres, which is quite a lot. But in these conditions, it's understandable, I suppose. However, I have looked at the weather forecast, and it does look like there is rain forecast for tomorrow at about the race start time. So they're going to have to get used to this condition maybe for the race tomorrow. Absolutely
right. Yeah, these are all valuable amounts of learning for everybody. That's the pit crews, exactly as you say, understanding how a driver is going to come into their box, how easy it is for the driver to stop on those marks, of course. Pierre Gasly making his way back on foot down the pit lane. I actually wonder if that will be if he'll get a slap on the wrist for that, because he actually just crossed a live pit lane as cars were coming in on foot, and that's not something we ever want to see. But
I think he could, Mark. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's not. I remember Lewis Hamilton got in trouble, didn't he, with the officials at Qatar last year for walking across a live track. I mean, this time most of the cars were seeing very odd footage here. Is that Ricciardo driving down the pit lane? It looks like he's warming his tyres, doesn't it?
It's weaving heavily in the pit lane, which again, probably from a safety perspective, is not ideal because it's full of people, of course, waiting to receive their cars.
I mean, from experience, that's not going to do anything at that speed, and all it's going to do is probably annoy the marshals and the stewards.
Well, also he's on his way in, so he doesn't need tyre temperature. He's about to have those tyres taken off the car. Yeah. But anyway, we've got a red flag, which means, of course, nobody out on circuit. I don't think it'll be particularly long because Gasly's car is already on a crane being scooped up out of that gravel trap, taken away, and I think very quickly we'll get the circuit back to green again. But from a Pierre Gasly perspective and an Alpine perspective, that's obviously not great. We know that Pierre Gasly, Andrew, has a huge number of penalties for changing all of his power unit components, so he will start at the back of the grid. So his focus, or what would have been his focus in this session, was not in any way on qualifying, but much more about the race tomorrow.
Yeah, and he's kind of ruined that a bit, hasn't he, by sticking it into the gravel. It's actually it's about the worst place he could have gone off, because most of the track around here, not all of it, because there are a couple of gravel traps. There's another one at Luffield, which is the long right-hand sort of hairpinny thing back onto what used to be the old pit straight, now the run down towards Copse. But more or less, generally, if you go off at Silverstone, you'll get grass or tarmac, Sam, won't you? And for Beckett's, for example, you can spin a long way and not hit anything there, thank goodness, because it's so high speed. And the runoff area at Copse is mostly asphalt as well. So it's a bit unfortunate. It was a very clumsy, slow-looking spin, wasn't it? It looked like, as you say, Sammy had no temperature in the tyres and he just lost it. And sort of, it's those moments when a Formula One driver looks very average when they have those sorts of accidents.
This moment we just described to you with Daniel Ricciardo weaving his way down the pit lane has actually been noted by the stewards, so expect more to come from that one. The session is about to get underway in about 10 seconds time again, so we will get the remaining 47 minutes, which is what's left on the clock, of the final practice session of this British Grand Prix weekend. Jenny.
Yes, Pierre Gasly has now made it into the Alpine garage. He's just put his baseball cap on. Obviously disappointed. He's just looking at the data traces. Each team have their own data traces and their own way of getting the clips of what's happened back, and he can look on that, and he's actually just looking back at the spin now. So it's fascinating. They all have access to a huge amount of data.
Yeah, that's right. There'll be a lot of analysis from everybody up and down the pit lane of everything that, particularly off the back of yesterday, of course. 2 practice sessions that happened yesterday, FP1 and FP2, where it was all about learning about this circuit with these cars in the conditions that we had, which were very, very cold. Lap time's actually quicker yesterday than we saw for the pole position time last year. Some of that will be from the development of the cars, which has taken huge leaps and bounds as we've had this stable set of regulations, and that will, of course, continue into next year. And some of it probably, I guess, the temperatures being a little bit cooler helps to get a little bit of extra performance as well.
Yeah, the tyres are in a happier window when it's cooler. Also, the engine is in a happier place when it's cooler. One thing that was probably slowing them down a little bit yesterday was the crosswind, but today certainly is even colder again. Extremely damp and wet conditions out there, although everybody's already on the more favoured intermediate tyre. Nobody's out there on the wet tyre. That's because the Formula One cars move the water out of the way so quickly, because they generate so much energy into the surface. The water dissipates. It's nowhere near dry enough to try slicks, but certainly I think for the remainder of this session, everybody will be heading out there on the intermediate tyre.
Yeah, that's right. And it's actually really important, isn't it, to understand where that crossover point is, because if we get conditions like this, either in qualifying later today or indeed for the race tomorrow, understanding the difference between performance on the intermediate tyre in these damp conditions, and as we just start to get the dry line appearing, which may well happen, although there could well be a little bit more rain. We've had a little note to say there could be more rain on the way, but it's understanding how the circuit changes and how the dry line forms, and therefore how quickly we can get off the intermediate and onto the slick. That's going to be crucial for race strategy, isn't it?
It is indeed, if we ever get back to running in the dry this weekend. But learning about that crossover is absolutely vital. When they do the simulations in what we call the DIL, back at base, that's basically the driving simulator that we use in order to do all of our homework.
DIL
before
because
each
driver in the loop.
Driver in the loop, exactly. We will try different grips of the circuit. So typically, if you drive 70% in the DIL, it's replicating wet running, and then you'll do 70, 80, 90, 100, and then 105 and 110 to cover all ranges for the weekend. Getting towards 80-85%, you're looking at a slick tyre is faster than a wet tyre.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, crucial information. We'll keep an eye on that, of course. I don't think there's any rain falling as we speak at the moment, but it is still very wet and very damp, and because it's so cold out there, it's going to take a little while before we do start to see any of that really clearing enough to even consider a dry tyre. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But we have now got most cars, all bar 4 cars now, out on the circuit, on that intermediate tyre, learning what they can. Of course, a lot of work has happened overnight, both in that simulator back at the team's bases that Sam was just talking about there, but also literally physical work on the cars. All that learning that was carried out yesterday can result in changes to the setup and things like suspension and ride height and aero levels. Having debriefed the drivers and looked through the data, all that learning gets put into practice with changes which they are now seeing, hopefully, the benefits of, or at least the adjustments and how they affect those cars. So different conditions, of course. Here's George Russell.
I mean, the track is definitely drying a bit now.
Okay, well, that's good information for his team. That's, of course, he's relaying that back on the radio to his own engineers. Also useful for everybody else. But it's drying, but it's definitely not dry.
It's drying, yes, and you look at the amount of spray that's coming off those rear tyres now. There's not an awful lot of spray, but it's just slippery. It's so treacherous out there.
And we see it often, don't we, particularly in a race situation, as we get through this phase and it starts to dry. The intermediate tyres, although they're very good in these conditions, the moment you start to get a dry line, they get destroyed so quickly because the temperature builds. They're designed to clear the water, and if you don't have the standing water, they really don't last very long, do they?
No, as we see a yellow flag in Sector 1. Haven't got any information yet. Green flag, okay. But the intermediate tyre that they run in Formula 1 that Pirelli have given them is actually a pretty reasonable tyre. You can take it, if you wanted to almost pretty much dry running. It will be slower, but you can take it that far, whereas the full extreme wet is exactly that. It's for extreme wet, and I feel like the window to use the wet tyre is a lot smaller than the window to use the intermediate.
Well, the drivers call it the safety car tyre, don't they, Sam? Because basically it's useless. It's good for driving behind the safety car and dispersing some water, but as soon as they get up to racing speed, the drivers want to be in the intermediate as soon as they possibly can, because it's just a much faster tyre.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got just over 41 minutes. We are green. Everybody back out on the circuit now, getting the laps in, because these are crucial. As I said, these are valuable learning laps. 41 minutes on the clock. At the moment, we've got Lewis Hamilton at the top of the timesheets, just ahead of his fellow Brit, Lando Norris. How will those two guys fare over the course of this weekend? We could potentially get to even the possibility, outside though it may seem, of 3 British drivers on a British podium here at Silverstone. Of course, one man who will hope to get right in the way of that is Max Verstappen, the championship leader. 81 points the lead he has after a dominant start to this season, but the competition at the front is now very, very tight.
It's at a spin, all good.
Yeah, copy that.
Good, no grip at all, man.
Valtteri Bottas in the bright green car of the Sauber team has just had a spin. Managed to keep it going, as he said. He's all good, didn't hit anything, but that just is a sign of how slippery and treacherous it still is out there. So nobody anywhere near brave enough to get onto the slick tyres. It's Leclerc in the Ferrari who currently sits top of the timesheets. Verstappen's behind him. The time's almost meaningless to some extent at this point with the changing conditions, but it is 8/10 back to Verstappen from Leclerc. Then it's Hamilton, Norris, and then Tsunoda rounding out.
See these lap times just be lowered and lowered throughout this session. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. At the beginning of the session, you want to generate temperature in the tyre, so you've got to try and push from the offset. It's not like a soft tyre in the dry where you have to tippy-toe around. In these tyres, you have to put the energy into the tyre to get the heat. But in order to do that, you have to go through a little bit of pain, and it's going to be very difficult on those first couple of laps. Once you've got the heat, you're going to feel the grip coming quite quickly and be able to perform at a much better level.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, you know, you often see a difference in these cars. We're seeing Charles Leclerc now going fastest of anybody at top of the timesheets. How different can a car behave between wet and dry? Can you find a car that's dominant in the wet, and yet when you do get into the dry conditions, it's nowhere near quite as well balanced?
Absolutely. I mean, if your car is set up predominantly for wet running, you would basically soften the car. So you'd make the car a lot more lazy, just making it a bit more compliant in a wetter environment, in a wetter condition. In the dry, you'd want a much stiffer car. So it's far more agile, changes direction very, very quickly. But that doesn't work so well in the wet. So yeah, you can absolutely have a car that's great in the dry and horrible to drive in the wet, or vice versa.
And that's going to be part of the decision-making process as we go through this afternoon, because when we get into qualifying today, Formula One rules mandate that Parc Fermé rules kick in. You can't make mechanical changes to that car once the car leaves the garage for qualifying. So they've got to have half an eye on tomorrow's race and the weather forecast for tomorrow's race, which, as Jenny said earlier on, could well be wet. So even if we get a dry qualifying session later, which is looking more and more likely it's going to dry up as the day rolls on, they're going to have half an eye on potentially a wet race. And so that compromising setup has got to go into the thinking process, hasn't it?
Yeah, and also wing levels.
Yeah.
You know, how much downforce are we going to run? Because as a driver, you would want typically a little bit more downforce in the wet to make sure that the car is sticking to the road a little bit better. But in the dry, that might slow you down far too much in a straight line. You might be susceptible to being overtaken. So these are all things that the drivers and the teams are going to have to take into consideration.
Yeah, and let's talk about this circuit, because it is, as I said earlier on, it's an iconic circuit. It's one of the most famous, certainly from a driver's perspective. Everyone seems to absolutely love it here. It's got a lot of high-speed corners, and a lot of those high-speed corners are quite long duration as well. So you're really relying on the aerodynamics. You're having to put a lot of trust in the aerodynamics to maintain the grip through a very fast turn, aren't you?
Absolutely, which is why I think McLaren are so strong at the moment. I think they've done really well with their aero package recently. Since the middle of last year, they've come on a long, long way. Interestingly, we've just seen Lewis Hamilton on a cool lap actually finding wetter parts of the circuit to cool those intermediate tyres down. That means that he's getting a little bit of overheating, and he wants to bring them back down to temperature. So for sure, this track is improving really quickly. We're still nowhere near slicks, but the improvements are happening rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, lots more to come. We've still got 35 minutes to go. You're listening to me, Mark Priestley. Alongside me, I've got McLaren Formula E racing driver Sam Bird and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. And down in the pit lane is Jenny Gale.
Yes, it's cold down here, I'll just say that for the record, if you didn't know already. Lewis Hamilton, top of the timesheets. Interestingly, his brother's here in the garage at the moment, just watching on Nicholas. I saw his dad, Anthony, yesterday as well, and this is traditionally a race where lots of family members, lots of friends come, lots of phone calls saying, oh, can I have a ticket? From people that you haven't heard from in a year. But certainly the family are hoping that he goes well around this track, and especially when it's wet.
Yes, a lot of home support for not just Hamilton, of course, but all of the British drivers. We've got 3 of them. We'll have another one on the grid next year. Oliver Bearman was announced yesterday as a Haas Formula One driver for the 2025 season. We saw what he was capable of back in Jeddah, where he stood in the Ferrari for Carlos Sainz when he was ill, and that has been rewarded with a full-time drive for next year. So British motorsport, Sam, and certainly from a young driver perspective, in good shape, right?
In a really, really good place at the moment. We've got some amazing representatives at the top of the sport, you know, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Lando Norris, Ollie Bearman now. I mean, Alexander Albon is in that bracket as well. Obviously, he's a dual nationality. But yeah, we've got a great representation in Formula One and other any other categories as well. Formula E, yeah, we've got loads of drivers in Formula E from these shores. Also representing us in wet, we've got people like James Calado, who recently won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. British motorsport is in a great place. Yeah, that's right. British motorsport is such a strong industry, not just from a driving perspective, but even from a teams and engineering. The whole industry that surrounds this sport is so much largely anchored here in the UK and particularly around the Silverstone area for so many years, and it's produced the engineering talents that we now have become, almost as big as stars as some of the drivers. Adrian Newey on the market now, looking potentially for a new team, and everyone's clambering over each other to get his services, aren't they? Well, all the teams bar Ferrari and whatever the Sauber and the RB team. Those 3, every other team is based in Oxfordshire.
Well, even RB really, because they're at Vista, and the theoretical base is Faenza in Italy, but they've got a big factory at Vista, and most of the people work there. Really, they're sort of engineering management types, anyway. Big moment for Lando Norris there, just going into Abbey Turn 1. Similar that we've seen lots of other drivers have over the course of this weekend, and particularly over the course of this session with it being so wet. He lives to fight another day back onto the circuit, but that lap, of course, will be ruined in terms of time. It's really not so much about lap time as things stand at the moment. It's more about learning where the grip is, how the circuit's changing as the conditions are evolving, how easy is it for you in your car to get these intermediate tyres up to temperature, and of course, crucially, how long, as we said earlier, will they last as the conditions change. It is Hamilton, our British hopeful, who's won at this place 8 times now. Lewis Hamilton tops the timesheets with a 1:38.5 with 33 minutes left on the clock. Charles Leclerc is in second, Verstappen is third, Carlos Sainz in the other Ferrari fourth, Sergio Perez, who had a slightly better day on Friday in the second Red Bull, he's in fifth, Oscar Piastri, who finished second, just behind his teammate in FP2 in the second McLaren, that's in sixth place. George Russell is seventh, Lando Norris is eighth, and Nico Hülkenberg ninth. Hülkenberg had a good day yesterday, didn't he? Finished in fourth place with some upgrades on that car, and it was a difficult session to read, but the car was quick out the box.
Yeah, I think it's not a surprise really that he's up there more than what people think. He is a really, really strong driver, but fourth place was an exceptional effort. Will he stay there for the rest of the weekend? No, I don't think he will. But I certainly think that he could be pushing for a Q3.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that car is suited more to this circuit, particularly as we saw in the drive, but actually Hülkenberg's sitting in ninth at the moment, so not too bad as things stand, but I think it could be a good weekend for that team. He's a driver that's had a long career in this sport, like a few others have, but he's been rewarded with a big manufacturer outfit drive for next year. He moves to Sauber in 2025, that will of course in turn become the Audi team coming into Formula One for 2026. So a real big opportunity for Hülkenberg in the latter stages of a career that's, sort of failed to produce a major result, he's never stood on the top step of a podium, has he?
No, he hasn't.
Well, any step of the podium.
He never had a podium. Right.
He, in his first year with Williams, he actually did an amazing job in mixed conditions on slicks and put it on pole in Sao Paulo. I think that was back in 2010. And, I think a lot of people tipped him for big things, and he never got the break with a major team that maybe he deserved. A lot of that was due to the regulations back then, whereby teams and major manufacturers were opting for let's call it more slight drivers that weighed less because that's what you needed.
Yeah.
And Nico Hülkenberg is a tall, big guy that weighs a little bit more. And unfairly, I think he's been denied the opportunity to drive for a major team, but he's doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you what, I was just going to say, Mark, Lewis Hamilton's looking very, very comfortable in these wet conditions. He's swapping the fastest times with Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari at the moment, with Lando Norris just a little bit behind them. But it's reminding me of China. Do you remember this when the Mercedes earlier this year wasn't competitive at all? Hamilton put that car on pole for the sprint race in the wet. And he's looking, okay, it's only practice, so you can't judge anything really, but he's every time he does a lap, basically he's going to the top of the timesheets at the moment, Lewis Hamilton.
Well, I suspect if you're Lewis Hamilton, with a car that, yes, has joined the top four in a more regular capacity in terms of they have improved performance of that car, but they probably are still the fourth quickest team in most conditions. So if you're Lewis Hamilton, you want a bit of rain, don't you? That gives you an opportunity.
And turn 12, you can use more.
The radio. I was in the middle of 7.
Copy.
That was Carlos Sainz on the radio, having a little bit of a moment, and his engineer just talking to him in the middle of a corner. Carlos just telling him that is not the ideal or optimum time to be spoken to. Have you ever read that, Sam?
It doesn't bother me.
Does it not?
It doesn't bother me. The engineer can speak to me whenever he wants, and I've said that multiple times to Stephen Lane, who looks after me. With regards to Lewis in the wet, Lewis has always been sublime in the wet, though, hasn't he? I remember here in 2008, where he won. It was such an incredible victory, absolutely dominant. So we know that if anybody can drive the wheels off a racing car around Silverstone in the wet, look no further than Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it is wet, particularly in qualifying, but again into tomorrow's race as well, you're looking at the likes of Hamilton to have an opportunity. You're even looking at maybe Alonso, a team that did well yesterday. Here's Norris.
A weather update for you. The rain might get worse in 15 minutes' time.
Okay, there you go. So we may never get to see the dry tyres with about half an hour, just under half an hour of this session to go. It's almost there. I suspect if there was no more rain, we probably would get there. But if the rain's on the way...
We need a little bit of temperature as well, though. Just a little bit of temperature. No rain for the last half an hour, and we could see a couple of dry laps towards the end. I would imagine if it were to dry, every single driver would want to go out there on a set of soft tyres if they've got that in their allowed allocation. George Russell is on a good lap though, purple in sector 1, green in sector 2. Those Mercedes are working well in these conditions.
Yeah, they certainly are, and it's actually tricky. It's a long lap here, isn't it? It's very open, very flat, and actually it's wet in certain parts. Sector 1 looks quite wet, sector 3 looks reasonably dry, so it's quite a difficult thing to balance over the course of a lap, particularly from an engineering perspective, making decisions about tyres, and even from a driving perspective. That's a bit of a compromise, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're seeing that pretty much down the Wellington Straight towards turn 6 and turn 7, which are Brooklands and Luffield, where the BRDC is based. That's looking the driest section of track overall right now. A lot of drivers are actually moving offline to try and get a little bit of moisture and water back onto the tyre so the tyre performs better later on in the lap. Now it's Lewis Hamilton's turn to reply to George Russell's time, who's just gone half a second quicker than his teammate Hamilton, purple in sector 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you're right, the Mercedes looking pretty strong as things stand. Verstappen has just come out of the pits to start his out lap. Jenny, I gather you're down at Red Bull.
Yes, he's just come out. He's on the intermediate still, and if I look up above the bricks that goes over the track now, linking the hotel with the pit complex, there's a very dark cloud which looks very ominous hovering above my head. I think I might be about to get wet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As we look out of the commentary box window over that start-finish straight, it is getting very, very dark, and the clouds are forming very quickly. So that radio message we heard a few moments ago that rain is on the way looks like it could well be accurate. So these could be the driest of the conditions that we get right now, and therefore the quickest of the lap times. It's George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Nothing much splitting the pair of them at the top of the timesheets. Then it's Leclerc from Norris, from Sainz, from Verstappen on that out lap on his intermediate tyre. He's in 6th, just ahead of his teammate Perez. Nico Hülkenberg looking good up in 8th place in the Haas, then Piastri in the second McLaren. Alonso rounds out the top 10. And let's get you to the bottom of the order, because it's Stroll, Albon, Ocon, Magnussen, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, who will be investigated after the session for that moment we talked about earlier on of weaving around in the pit lane. Then it's Sargent, Bottas, Zhou, and then Gasly, who found his way into a gravel trap earlier on in this session. Jenny?
Yes, I just noticed actually, standing by Sergio Perez's car, that Adrian Newey is in the garage wearing his full Red Bull kit, and I didn't expect to see him in the garage. He's got his usual red notebook tucked under his right arm, and he's just looking down at Sergio Perez's front left tyre, about to send him out, I think, as the rain starts to come down here just lightly at the moment. But interesting that Newey is back in the Red Bull garage.
Yeah, visiting selected races this year. We know that he leaves the team and in fact will leave Red Bull at the end of this season and will be free potentially to join another team in the first part of next year, which is very interesting to everybody up and down this paddock ahead of a major regulation change coming into the sport for 2026. Lots of teams vying for his services. He's sitting at the moment with a number of offers on the table, and we await to hear which one of those he will accept, if indeed he will. Could he retire? He certainly doesn't need the money, but I think an opportunity like a big regulation change, the one that's on the way, is too tempting for him, isn't it, Andrew?
Well, Mark, he went through quite a lot to negotiate an early exit, because what happened in that story basically was that with the BBC we broke that he was going to be leaving Red Bull and then in sort of the next few days he was negotiating an exit, and after we broke the story initially, Red Bull was sort of feeding out to certain parts of the media that he wouldn't be able to join another team until 2027 effectively, because he had a contract till the end of 25 and then he would have a gardening leave period. I knew all along that wasn't true, and he was negotiating an early exit, and he's now, as far as I'm aware, he's able to join another team from March the 1st 2025. You don't do that in his position if you don't want to join another team, do you? So yeah. I'm pretty certain. Also, I spoke to Adrian in Miami. He kept his cards pretty close to his chest, as he always does, but I've known him a long time, and I'm pretty sure from the things he didn't say, but the way he didn't say them, that he's definitely looking for another job. I think at the moment it's just a question of whether that other job's going to be in Maranello or Woking or Silverstone.
Yeah, fascinating times. I was actually with Eddie Jordan, who strangely, I don't know how it's happened, but has ended up as Adrian's manager.
Well, do you know, I was thinking about that when I first heard that EJ was his manager, which was some weeks before the story actually emerged, because I heard rumblings that something was going on. My first reaction was, what on earth is he doing asking Eddie Jordan to be his manager? But then I started to think about it. Actually, you couldn't have a better person really to walk into Red Bull and sort of like throw the china around and play the sort of mad Irishman like EJ does so well, and basically bully his way into getting a negotiated exit, and he's done a fantastic job of doing so.
It's just like pulling the pin on a grenade, isn't it, and then sending EJ in with it. But yeah, I was with him the other night and at an event, and he did say that he's now at the stage where he's got all of these offers on the table, and even Eddie, as his manager, is now just waiting for Adrian to make his mind up where he wants to go. But it's a fascinating prospect, because he's done so well time and time again. Every time there's a big regulation change, it's been Adrian Newey typically that has come out on top, found the loopholes and developed a car that maximises whatever regs are on the table.
I think that he's the most important and most decorated designer in Formula One history.
Yeah,
you look
absolutely.
at what he's been able to achieve over the last, dare I say it, 3-4 decades.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of Grand Prix that he's won surpasses anything that any driver has won.
Yeah.
So he's phenomenal at what he does, and for sure he doesn't need to go looking for work. Work will find him, and every single team pretty much up and down the pit lane will be fighting tooth and nail to get his services, knowing that with what he knows and his ability to manipulate the rules, especially when there's new technical laws coming out, he'll find you lap time.
Yeah, I used to work with Adrian back in the day at McLaren, and I remember struggling away working on a car on a component he designed that was so fiddly and difficult to actually fit to the car, but it was a component that used to get broken on the curbs all the time, so we were regularly having to change it, and it was always a battle and a fight to get this thing changed. And I remember Adrian walking past me in the garage, and I said, Adrian, just a moment, out of interest, when you're designing these things, just as a rough percentage, how much of your capacity goes into thinking about people like me having to fit it, as opposed to how much goes into performance? And he said, none. It was all about the performance. And that, you have to take your hat off and respect that, because that focus and obsession with performance is what's brought him so many of those great results. Jenny, the clouds above us have got very, very dark. Are you wet down there? Are you getting soaked?
I'm about to be, I think. There's a
Hang on a sec, Jenny. Hang on 1 second.
It's level 1 and we expect level 2 in around 5 minutes.
There we go. That was just Ricardo being told probably what you're about to tell us, that it is about to start raining. Yes.
It is raining, I can tell you that. In the pit lane, as George Russell just goes out, the other Mercedes has gone out already. That's Oscar Piastri whizzing by me. He's just coming into the pit lane, as is Max Verstappen as well. Yeah, it's just about to rain, so I don't know if they're just sending them out to experience what it's like at Silverstone when it's raining, or they just didn't realise that was about to happen. But that's what they're going to get, the Mercedes pair.
Yes, it is absolutely coming down. It's almost coming down sideways, such is the wind around this place. I mean, Sam, you talked about the wind being gusty yesterday and how that really affects the cars, and the same sort of thing happens on a day like today. It obviously affects the rain, and it blows the rain in and the weather in very, very quickly, so it can change. But that wind affecting the aerodynamics of the car, depending on the angle that it's blowing at you coming into a corner, can dramatically change how you approach these turns.
Absolutely. As we were saying yesterday, I mean, if you've got a tailwind, let's say, going into Copse Corner, you're going to have a lift off the throttle in modern Formula 1 cars. If you've got a headwind going into Copse, it's a straight line with a little bit of a kink. That's what modern Formula 1 cars are like. They are phenomenal at cornering. But you're right, wind and wind direction are key for lap time and balance. We saw yesterday we had a crosswind across the track, and a lot of people were fighting the car through Maggots, Beckett's, and then through Chapel. A lot of cars were getting to what we call like maximum lateral G-force. The wind would then pick the car up, and literally the car would just snap in the middle of the corner. Yeah,
we did see it a lot yesterday. The temperature is very low today, 11.5 degrees only. Track temperature 15.8. That's so cold. I mean, it's summertime. We're in the middle of July. What on earth is going on?
This is English summer.
It is.
Enjoy it.
It is the great British summer. Absolutely. What more should we expect? It hasn't deterred the fans, though. We're expecting a lot of them. We got nearly 500,000 of them come through this event last summer, and we would expect something similar again. It's a wonderful event on the Formula 1 calendar. It does, as I said at the start of the show, mark the halfway point, and this championship is coming alive as we get there as well. Lando Norris really putting Max Verstappen under pressure. We haven't yet seen exactly where the two, I don't know whether I should call them title protagonists, but it certainly is Max Verstappen and Lando Norris who are the only ones really at the moment with the performance to challenge each other at the front. We haven't really, I don't think, seen the true performance of either of those two drivers and their cars over the course of this weekend, because Max Verstappen yesterday had a big moment on his flying lap and aborted it. Lando Norris did top the timesheets, but it seemed a little bit all over the place in terms of, we had some surprises in there. I don't think we got a true
surprises. We did, but Lando Norris topped both sessions, so clearly the McLaren is working well. I think Verstappen wasn't completely comfortable with his car yesterday. I think that was pretty clear. Everyone else seemed a little bit off from that. Certainly, if we're looking at the times now, everybody's had a decent stint on the intermediate tyre. The Mercedes look like the car that have raised their game in these kind of conditions. Lando Norris is just less than 2/10 off the two Silver Arrows, but then there's a big gap to the next gaggle of cars that includes the two Red Bulls and the two Ferraris.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, Mercedes looking very, very happy right now. They will be hoping for more of the same as we get to the sharp end of the day, as qualifying rolls around later on this afternoon. That's a sort of resurgent Mercedes who have opened up a new direction of development with their car, discovered something in the way that the team works, the whole operation functions behind the scene, to unlock some of the potential in these new generation of cars, something they've been struggling with for the last couple of seasons, really. Going off in all directions, thinking they've found the answers, but then finding that it wasn't really the answer. And they have been off the pace since those dominant years of Lewis Hamilton, winning so many championships, and the team back-to-back it's been Red Bull that have taken over that mantle. It's now Red Bull coming under at least some challenge from the likes of McLaren and Lando Norris. So we hope that will continue. Of course, all the learning that happens over the course of this season is highly likely to continue into next year, because we don't get that big regulation change we were talking about until 2026. So these cars effectively will carry over. So we can expect more of the same, can't we?
We can expect more of the same, but it will still be a development war.
Yeah.
People will still be trying to find more points of downforce, improve their chassis, improve their suspension over the next year and a half. So in this sport, you never stand still.
No,
of course, there
absolutely.
will be some teams that stop developing this current regulation car earlier than others to try and focus on 2026. That's kind of what people do. They get to a point and then they go, right, we're going to abandon this project or put most of our efforts to 2026, and all of them will already be working on it. But when you're in a championship hunt, you're going to be pushing as hard as you can on what you're doing right now.
Yeah, and that includes the likes of Red Bull, who, as we talked about earlier, haven't really had too much in the way of a challenge over recent years. So had the sort of fortune to be able to ease off in terms of their own development of the current car, switch quite early onto the following year's car, which is probably a large part of why we saw such dominance at the start of this season. But now they can't afford to do that, and certainly going into next year, it's not going to be the same.
What's really interesting for me is, what does Adrian Newey do now? And maybe Andrew can answer this a little bit better than me. So he knows he's leaving. Now, does he throw himself fully into the work that I can imagine he'll be doing? So working on trying to extract the maximum out of the rules and regulations for 2026 for his current team? Or will he be kind of just taking it a little bit easy and looking at where he might be and what he might do with the next team?
So my understanding is that he is not being allowed to work on the 2026 Red Bull, because they know that he's going to go to another team and work on their 2026 car. So they're keeping him well away from that with Chinese walls. He's going on holiday, I can tell you that. He told Martin Brundle on Sky that he was going to take his wife to France in their motorhome. He talked to me about going to the west coast of Ireland. I was trying to persuade him to go there. He's never been there before. I don't know which one he's going to choose, or maybe he'll do both. And then I think he'll come back. While he's away, he'll be thinking about his future, and then he'll come back and make a decision sort of a little bit later in the year about whether he goes to Ferrari, McLaren or Aston Martin. And I think Aston Martin is the third favourite out of those three. Don't know which way he'll go out of Ferrari and McLaren.
Well, let's just talk about Aston Martin quickly, because they're a team that are based literally a stone's throw from this circuit entrance here at Silverstone. A brand new facility, brand new campus that's now online. They've got a brand new wind tunnel and simulator about to be opened and start operating as well. So they're a team that's investing heavily. And Andrew, a couple of big name signings in recent times as well. So a sign of intent for that team.
Yeah, so they've signed Andy Cowell as their sort of group chief executive officer. Here's Hamilton's radio.
So with this level of rain, just expect the standing water to be increasing a little bit more.
Telling Lewis Hamilton to suck eggs there. He's having driven in Formula 1 in the wet for 15 years. It's raining, the track will get wetter, was the message there. Andy Cowell was the head of Mercedes' HPP engine program for a decade and a half, and did an incredible job. Sam Denny, you'll know him very well from your work there in the past, making the best hybrid engine when the new regs came in 2014. Very highly regarded guy. So he's taking over from Martin Whitmarsh as CEO at Aston Martin, and they announced that this week. What they haven't announced yet is that Enrico Cardile, the Ferrari chassis technical director, has also been signed by Aston Martin, and he's going to be there, as I understand it, their chief technical officer, so above technical director Dan Fallows. So that's those two together. That's quite a statement. And obviously they're also chasing Adrian Newey, as we've discussed. Don't know whether they'll get him or not. So the intent is there with Aston Martin. The problem for Aston Martin at the moment is that they've gone, having made a great leap to the front at the beginning of 2023, and everyone in Formula 1 was delighted to see Fernando Alonso back competing for wins and podiums a year and a half ago. They've sort of fallen progressively backwards since then. And I know that Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, is very, very unhappy about that. I've heard stories of a bit of a stormy meeting between him, and Dan Fallows and Mike Crack, the team principal in Imola a few races ago, Stroll asking them what on earth was going on, why weren't the upgrades working. He's a very demanding character, Lawrence Stroll. So not a happy place on the development front, Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso has also not had his best few races in the last few races, which is not like him, Sam. They've got some work to do, both with the car, and I think Fernando needs to. I don't know why he's not been performing that well in the last few races, but he definitely hasn't been.
Fernando drives better when he's really motivated and when he's got something competitive underneath him, or has a little bit of guts around it, and that he can grab hold of and get a result. He's motivated. I feel like right now he feels like this is kind of a waste of a year.
I think he feels like that.
So he's like, well, I'm not going to put my heart and soul into it. I know I can drive, but am I going to give it that swashbuckling style that that people love me for so many years? I don't think he's necessarily putting everything into it.
And it was interesting hearing him talking in Monaco, actually, because he had admitted in Monaco that he hadn't driven well in Imola and Miami. But he also said that, and he was referring to Imola this weekend at that time. He was basically saying that sometimes you get to a weekend where you feel as nothing's going anywhere and you're not going to achieve anything, and you might as well try a few things and almost throw the weekend away with the hope of the next weekend or the weekend in 3 weekends' time or the next developments or whatever come better. That's not an excuse for crashing at Rivazza, which is what he did in Imola. But obviously he was trying too hard at Rivazza when he crashed that weekend. But it's just, what you're saying is exactly that.
Fernando operates at such a high level, and if the car isn't giving him the results that he wants, then he's like, well, do I need to give it 101%? One thing as well is that Aston Martin recently moved into their amazing new home, which is right here, and also I believe that they are now using their new wind tunnel facility. Now that on the face of it, you think, oh well, that will immediately bring results. I don't think I've ever really known a new wind tunnel to immediately bring results. It's like they need to learn about the wind tunnel, and you need to go through a little bit of pain in order to then get success out of it. It's not just we've got a new facility, we've got a new aero wind tunnel, therefore it's going to make lap time. That's not the case in Formula 1.
No, there's a huge amount of work in calibrating that, understanding what the results look like, and certainly how those results correlate to the actual car on a racetrack. So probably some time before we see results from that. But a slightly better day from Aston Martin yesterday in the dry. Lance Stroll finding his way up towards the top end, which was a little turn up for the books. That's maybe a small boost. We've got 8.5 minutes left on the clock. Most drivers down in the pit lane. Jenny, you're down there. I think you're at Red Bull. I think there must be both of those Red Bulls still in the pit garage at the moment. Yeah, there's a bit of work going on to Max Verstappen's car, actually. They've taken the engine cover off, and they were getting spanners and all sorts out. They're a bit furious, but they've just taken the tensor barrier away, which means he's just about to go out. They're just putting that cover back on and tightening it up. I've seen the tyres. It looks like they're red soft tyres, and I can't believe that they're about to go out on slicks. So maybe my eyes were not doing me well, but they're about to take the engine covers off. No, it's fine, don't worry. It's intermediates for Max Verstappen as he goes out. The covers come off, the tyres. He roars past me. Sergio Perez is still in the garage. He needs a good weekend, doesn't he? He's not had the best of times at the moment, and he needs to, on a track that he knows so well, he needs to go well this weekend. And just on Aston Martin, they are bringing an upgrade to Hungary, which they are hoping should move them a bit further up. But they're very aware that this is a development race and everyone else is doing exactly the same. So it's hard for them at the moment. They're in a bit of a sticky pickle. Yeah, first of all, I'm pleased that Max Verstappen's not going out on the slick tyre, because it is soaking wet, and that, even with the might of Red Bull's dominating car, I think that would have been a stretch. But with Aston Martin, I think they've been outdeveloped is effectively what's happened, because those around them, they were battling with Mercedes earlier in the year, and it's actually been the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren that have taken giant leaps forward, whereas Aston have been sort of left behind.
It's astonishing. If you look back to the first two races, Alonso was qualifying 4th, 5th, 6th.
Yeah.
Okay, they were going a bit backward in the races, but he's nowhere near that now. He's struggling to get even into the top 10.
Yeah, and you know, we've got to take hats off to the likes of Mercedes, who've turned, particularly in recent weeks, a huge corner. And as we said earlier, they have almost had a light bulb moment where they've realised where they've been going wrong, not just in recent races, but actually for the last couple of years. This idea of how the different functions within the organisation need to work much more closely together with this type of car, in terms of getting chassis dynamics working with aerodynamics and solving problems together as a group rather than individual functions within the organisation taking on each of those challenges. So that's something they feel like they've unlocked, and it has opened up a path for Mercedes where they may well be some way further back down that path than a lot of other teams, but it gives them scope to bring performance to the car, which they're now trying to do week in, week out, with upgrades coming thick and fast. So some potential for the likes of Mercedes, of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, but as things stand right now, in these very wet, slippery conditions here at Silverstone, with 5 minutes left of the third practice session of this British Grand Prix weekend, it is the two Mercedes that are quickest. It's Russell who tops the timesheets with a 1:37.5, obviously a long way off the times that we would expect in a dry session, but in these slippery conditions, it's George Russell and Lewis Hamilton that have made the best of them. Lando Norris in the McLaren is behind them. Carlos Sainz in the first of the two Ferraris is 4th. Max Verstappen out on the circuit right now on that intermediate tyre is in 5th. Leclerc is 6th, Piastri 7th. It's then Sergio Perez, who's still in the garage down at Red Bull. He's down in 8th place. Nico Hülkenberg is 9th, and Alexander Albon in the Williams, with a special livery on the Williams this weekend, highlighting the names of all of the members of their team from throughout the factory on display here at Silverstone, proudly displayed on their engine cover. That's a nice little touch for the team. And Albon in 10th place right now. Again, these wet or damp conditions, if they continue into qualifying, provide an opportunity for the likes of Williams and Albon, don't they?
They do indeed. Logan Sargent, actually, to be fair to him, has done a really decent job in this session. Currently sitting P12, only less than, just over a 10th off his, esteemed colleague Alexander Albon. So Logan Sargent having a decent session. Let's see if he can translate that into a Q2 appearance this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking further back, so that's the two Williams in 11th and 12th. Decent session, as you say, from them. Tsunoda, Stroll, Bottas, Ocon, we might expect to see them back there, but when we talk about opportunities for the likes of Williams, it's the same opportunity that's on a plate for some of these guys as well towards the back, and the other teams there haven't really made the most of it so far.
Absolutely, and someone like Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah.
This could be a real golden opportunity to cement his place within that team going forwards, because I think Liam Lawson is getting very frustrated at the fact that he's not in that seat. I think Helmut Marko is under pressure to get him that seat, which means that Daniel Ricciardo is under pressure. I think he needs a decent weekend or two.
How do you see that as a driver? The likes of Ricciardo, huge amount of experience, a well-loved character in this sport, but for quite a long period of time now, results both here at RB but also in his years at McLaren just haven't been good enough. They're not what we've come to expect from the early days of Daniel Ricciardo. How long does a team sort of hold out hope, particularly at a Red Bull operation where they're effectively in that RB team trying to feed into the next generation of Max Verstappen's and Sebastian Vettel's? How long do they give Daniel Ricciardo?
I'm not sure. It's such a hard question to ask. There's no guarantee that Liam Lawson would be any quicker, for example. Daniel Ricciardo is a proven race winner in this category of motorsport, and he can feed off that for forever pretty much. But there does come a point, if Tsunoda continuously beats him, then
I think been doing for a while
which he has been doing. I mean, he had that great sprint race in Miami.
Yeah.
But then the very following day, he was invisible,
and
which was really strange.
Hasn't it? He's not been consistent enough with those little glimmers of performance that we know are there from Daniel Ricciardo. It's not been consistent enough, and I do wonder if you are Helmut Marko and you are in this Red Bull organisation, You know what you're getting from Daniel Ricciardo, and I just wonder if the time is going to come, maybe sooner rather than later, where they decide to roll the dice and see what they get from a Liam Lawson. I mean, to some extent, what have they got to lose?
Exactly. When he did fill in, he did a super job, didn't he? He really was up there. He was fighting. His first Grand Prix, he did a cracking job in very, very difficult conditions. So I'd personally like to see Liam Lawson given the opportunity.
Yeah.
But this is Formula One. You don't know what's going to happen with that seat.
And we could well, if things work out a certain way, we could well end up with one of the biggest influxes of young drivers into the sport next year, because we've already got Ollie Behrman, as we said, signed for the Haas team next year. There's a lot of talk around the young Kimi Antonelli potentially coming into Mercedes. I wonder if Liam Lawson might get this opportunity. Jack Doohan knocking on the door at Alpine.
And do you know the crazy thing as well is Formula 2 is the feeder series to Formula 1. Now, it's normally the guys that finish first or second or win 7 or 8 races in a year in Formula 2 that then progress to Formula 1. Now, Ollie Behrman and Kimi Antonelli, Behrman is definitely going to Formula 1. Kimi Antonelli looks likely to. They've got their on F1 practice performances or testing away from, in a 2-year-old car performances, or on previous experience before Formula 2, because based on their Formula 2 results this year, you wouldn't put them near a Formula 1 car, to be honest. I mean, I don't think either of them are inside the top 6 or 7 in the championship, which is crazy, really, considering the talent that both of those guys have got. They're driving for a team called Prema, who are well renowned as being one of the best junior Formula teams in the world, yet they haven't got this Formula 2 car right.
Yeah, and it just shows the importance and the value of these Friday sessions that we get young drivers out in these Formula 1 cars working with the Formula 1 teams. The teams then get a much greater understanding of how these young drivers will work with the engineers, how their feedback is within the team, how they handle the pressure of a big moment like that, of course. And those things are equally, if not more valuable in many cases, than the actual results that you might see from another category. So, yes, fascinating times, potentially a lot of changes, all started, of course, by that shock move of Lewis Hamilton announcing that he's going to Ferrari at the end of this year for 2025 and beyond. That's triggered a whole cascade of driver moves within the market over the course of this season, and we haven't yet seen that come to its conclusion yet. More moves on the way. The checkered flag is now out at the end of the third and final practice session here at Silverstone on this British Grand Prix weekend. It's been a wet session. Rain coming down still now very heavily. The circuit's soaking wet. Everybody on the intermediate tyres for the entirety of the session, which means the lap times have been a little bit all over the place. Difficult one to read from a neutral perspective and a fan's perspective. That is wonderful. We're heading into qualifying with a little bit of an unknown about exactly who's quickest. But if I run you through the order, this very wet session has left with George Russell ending the session fastest in the Mercedes, closely followed by his teammate Lewis Hamilton in the sister car. Lando Norris, the man chasing down Max Verstappen at the top of the championship table. He's in third place. Carlos Sainz is fourth in the Ferrari. Max Verstappen, championship leader, with an 81-point lead over Lando Norris. He finished the session in fifth place. Leclerc is sixth. Oscar Piastri seventh. Alonso is eighth. Then it's Perez and Hülkenberg rounding out the top 10. Alex Albon in the Williams was 11th. Stroll, Sargent, Tsunoda, then Bottas, Ocon, Magnussen, Ricciardo, Zhou Guanyu and Pierre Gasly, who found his way into the gravel trap, bringing out the red flags early on, rounds out the top 20. He'll start the race with grid penalties tomorrow, therefore starting from the back of the field. But that's your order. There is no more practice. The next time we're on circuit will be later on this afternoon for qualifying for this British Grand Prix.
Thank you so much, Mark Priestley there with lead commentary. And I tell you what, the rain is now hoofing down. If it had been like this during practice, I don't think we'd have seen much going on out on track. But actually, the two McLarens lining up, line astern on the starting grid, just doing their practice starts. It looks amazing, actually, the shots of them in their papaya leaving the starting grid at the moment. But Sam, these conditions are... It's not summer, is it?
Well, it is if you live in England.
I mean, no, it's the worst I've known it.
It's
for
horrible.
A long time.
Right now, I can see from our position in the commentary booth above the pit lane that it is heavy sideways rain. So I hope you're enjoying it down there, Jenny.
Well, actually, I've cheated a little bit. I wanted to do something creative for the end of the show, so I thought I'll go up onto the top of Williams and I can see the whole paddock from there. I can see most of the circuit from there. It'll be really nice. Now I'm cowering under their tarpaulin gazebo, just sheltering from the rain because it's really, really not very nice. And I will try and find some tire warmers to warm my hands up on in just a moment. But things are looking good for Mercedes right now, but really difficult to get a gauge on what's going to happen later if it's dry.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's great, isn't it, for Formula One fans and for us watching on. This is exactly what we want. We don't want predictability, we want uncertainty. I'm sure the fans will want it to dry out a little bit, and the weather forecast does look like it might ease off as the day rolls on. But from an on-track competitive perspective, it's great to not know where we're going with this.
And so many Lando Norris fans this weekend, Sam. The McLaren revival is on, and could it be on in terms of who's going to qualify on pole?
I'm one of those fans, Jenny. I'm definitely one of those fans. No, I certainly think the McLaren looks strong in both conditions. On that form that we've just seen now, I'd say that Mercedes look really quite good. But yes, I think that a British pole position is definitely on the cards. If you look at Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Lando Norris, I think it could be a British 1, 2, 3. Let's wait and see.
Exactly. We will see exactly what's going to happen. Join us at 2:55, if my producer says that's right, hopefully, for qualifying and all our coverage. We will be back then, see if we can get a Brit on pole position. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.